Let's talk about family separation in the border. As I said before, the executive order has now been issued that will theoretically end family separations. They, of course, said they couldn't do this, then they did. Proves that Trump was bluffing, of course, and he lost. He got beaten. Donald Trump is a loser. He has always been a loser. He always backs down when people stand up to him, which ought to be a lesson for the Democratic Party and anyone on the left. Stop pandering, stop kowtowing, stop trying to compromise with this man. If you stand up to him, he backs down. He is like the prototypical bully in the schoolyard who gets all up in your face and acts real tough until you talk back to him. And then he finds a way to back down every time. He thought, and it's very clear, he thought that this was going to be a political culture war wedge issue for him, very much like his comments about NFL football players taking a knee in protest of criminal justice injustice. And what it all goes to show is he really is only thinking in terms of himself and what helps him politically, not thinking about the morality of a situation. So if he's attacking immigrants, if he's attacking ball players, if he's criticizing Jay-Z from the podium of one of his rallies, notice the common thread. It is about appealing to some of the most basic racial and ethnic and cultural prejudices and stereotypes. And it is about doing that because he knows there is a significant portion of his base for whom that plays well. It is not necessarily about Donald Trump having some deep ideological commitment to white nationalism. I mean, I think his actions are racist. Make no mistake. I think his actions are de facto white nationalism, but I don't give Donald Trump enough credit, frankly, to have a deep-seated commitment to a particular ideology. I think it may very well be there, but I'm saying above all, we know Donald Trump cares about Donald Trump. And so he will play this fiddle because he knows that works. And of course, the problem is the more you play that tune, the more you start to like it. So even if he started out only trying to manipulate his base with this stuff, you know, when you say something over and over and over again, it does become part of who you are. So I'm not trying to let him off the hook and say he's not racist for these things. I'm just saying there's also a political calculation, a personal narcissistic calculation in everything Donald Trump does. His motivations have always been, and I doubt this has changed, personal power and adoration. And that's what he gets out of these kinds of culture war attacks and these kinds of xenophobic policies that divide the country and really the world into us and them. Now, there are others in his administration very clearly motivated by racism and overt white supremacy. Stephen Miller, for instance, Trump's primary influence on immigration policy, a man who's been described by literally everyone who grew up with him as the worst person they ever knew. Can't find a single person, apparently, that grew up with this guy who actually likes him. The only person from his past that seems to have any fond feelings about him is Richard Spencer, a known white supremacist who happened to be at Duke when Stephen Miller was there. And they were actually worked together for a brief time on some right-wing political stuff at Duke University. So that tells you a lot. When the only dude that you ever hung out with who has any nice shit to say about you is basically a Nazi, you're probably doing life wrong, right? But that's the thing with Stephen Miller. So Miller is very much, I mean, his whole history, all the people that went to high school with him said he regularly made racist comments. He actually broke off a friendship with a friend of his and said in a letter explaining why, that he couldn't hang out with them anymore because he was Latino. So what more do you need to know about this guy, other than one more thing, perhaps, and that is he also likes to trigger liberals. It's fascinating. There's a Vanity Fair piece on Stephen Miller that came out about a week ago. It quotes people close to him and in the White House as saying that Miller actually likes to see the pictures of children being ripped from their families at the border. And why? Because it makes liberals cry. That is some seriously sadistic troll behavior. And it's one thing if somebody's doing that on Twitter and, you know, in the sort of anonymity of their Facebook feed. But this guy is at the highest levels of power. People quoted in this Vanity Fair article basically said, yeah, Miller is Waffen SS. That is like the most fanatical element of the Nazi machinery, right? This is someone who wants to make deliberately offensive comments, did so in high school, wants to push deliberately painful and offensive policy just to upset people. There is a terminology for that. That is antisocial behavior. That is sadistic. That's who Stephen Miller is. But in any event, before the order, just so we sort of recap, there were about 2,500 kids who had been separated from their families. Some of them sent thousands of miles away from their parents. Many of them had presented perfectly legally for asylum at legitimate ports of call, and yet their parents were not told where they were taken, when they were indeed taken from them, or when they could be reunited. Some of the children taken were as young as 3 months old, and now we're discovering that some of these kids were given powerful drugs, psychotropic drugs, against their will and without parental consent. There was a 10-year-old girl with Down syndrome ripped away from her parents. Her dad is a legal resident of the United States, was crossing the border again with this child in tow, and this child and the mother, I think, and the child was taken. Of course, when this was brought up on Fox News, Corey Lewandowski, one of the other sadistic members or former members of the Trump team, said infamously, "Womp womp." Right. In other words, who cares? No condemnation from the Fox host for his saying that. No condemnation from anyone on Fox for saying that. No condemnation from anyone in the administration that he used to work for, virtually anyone on the right. Womp womp. Poor little Down syndrome girl. Oh, well, parents shouldn't have broken the law. This is the lack of compassion. And this order that has been issued now, it doesn't ensure the immediate reuniting of those who have been separated. It doesn't do anything to reunite them or even guarantee that that's going to happen. Now, a federal judge has just issued an order I read about today, which does order the government to reunite these families within 30 days. But it's really hard to see how that's going to be assured. And I don't see anything to suggest what the punishment is going to be if the government fails to make that happen. Are we going to legally imprison the head of ICE? Are we going to legally imprison Secretary Nielsen at DHS? Are we going to impose some type of sanctions on Jeff Sessions? I mean, what's going to happen if that doesn't happen? I understand the court's ordering it, but I'm not sure what the consequences are if the government fails to do it. And let's be honest, even if they stop the family separations and they reunite families, at best, all that means is we're going to be housing families together in detention, often in tent cities in the desert in 100-degree heat. Still incredibly cruel. And there isn't any need for it. You could treat these migrants as other administrations did, administratively and civilly, releasing them on bond until their hearing and their adjudication is completed. I know people say, oh, they never come back. They never come back. Actually, the research suggests that somewhere between 2/3 and even 80% of the people who are released awaiting a hearing on their claim do in fact return. There are other ways that you could ensure that even greater. You could use ankle monitoring or something like that. There's been some pilot programs actually that have had even greater success than the 80%. That number comes from a study at Syracuse University a couple years back. So the idea that you have to simply prosecute the parents and you can't release them because they'll just run into the hinterland and, I don't know, get a job and contribute to the economic base of the country, well, that's not even true. But here's the thing. The president, doesn't want to appear weak. That's why they wanted the order in the first place. And that's why they want to criminally prosecute people who are coming across the border rather than handling it civilly and administratively. Because if you don't handle it criminally, that's considered weak. The base wants border crossers treated like hardened criminals. These are people whom the administration compares to a relative handful of migrants who go on to commit serious crimes. Whenever this issue comes up, they pivot to the statistically small percentage of immigrants, legal or otherwise, documented or otherwise, who come across and then commit crimes. They assume by their rhetoric that all these people are future members of MS-13 or whatever, right? This is just a way to whip up fear of the other. This is not about MS-13 members. The president keeps saying, oh, we've sent thousands of MS-13 members out of the country. All these hardened criminals are the people we're deporting. Actually, 3/4 or more of the people that are being deported have never been convicted of any violent crime at all. Most of them haven't even been accused of one. Only a few hundred, actually, it appears, are actually members of MS-13. So this is just nonsense, but it's a way to whip up fear. And issuing this executive order isn't really going to fix that problem. Really what this is the right wing trying to dehumanize immigrants of color from the global South and lower the threshold for our national acceptance of cruelty. This is a president who says immigrants are infesting the nation. His words. And that is something frighteningly that a new poll that came out this week found 84% of Trump supporters agree with. That immigrants are infesting the nation, and they agree with it, even when you don't tell them it was Trump who said it. Keep in mind, a lot of times, people don't necessarily hear what politicians say, but even when you present that phrase without identifying its author, since a Trump supporter would obviously, tend to like it if they knew it was Trump, even the ones who haven't been told it was Trump and don't know that are basically saying, yeah, I sort of agree with that. And 41% of all Americans agree with the comment, which even though it's a, minority, quote unquote, is still a pretty frightening number. And this dehumanization is working, right? We have story after story. You can see this stuff on YouTube. You can see it on website after website, documented stories of people talking about executing and killing and shooting border crossers, right? There was a National Guard member who apparently now is going to be disciplined, who got in trouble the other day for talking about shooting border crossers. There were frat boys at Texas Tech University, same thing. They've gotten in trouble for making those same comments. There's a former member of the Pussycat Dolls, very important in the world, who said the same thing she did the other day. And you hear these kind of comments all the time in the comment sections of probably your local newspaper, let alone, national news feeds, right? That we should just shoot them, one bullet to the head and save the government the money, right? This is spilling over, I should point out, into the way that the Republican Party even treats its own. Recently, the former chair, the outgoing chair of the Minnesota Republican Party, who was born in South Korea and adopted in the United States, said that she has been subject to repeated racial slurs and hostility about her place of origin and not being a real American and being, the C word for Chinese folks, which is not even Chinese, but, it's a word that gets used against all Asians, been called a dragon lady. Sadly, even in the face of this, she still denies that Trump has fomented this, even when it wasn't happening before, and even when it's been turned against her. So Stockholm Syndrome is real, y'all. But the point is, this is eating their own. Like this kind of hostility, you cannot separate this from the larger phenomena of Trumpism. This is a guy who is essentially saying that the immigrants that are coming are not human. He actually said during the height of this family separation crisis that the children who were coming were lying about why they were coming to the U.S., that they'd been coached to lie. They weren't really fleeing violence. They were really coming for other reasons, which he wouldn't specify. But the suggestion was they were these nefarious reasons, like they're coming to take advantage of us, right? There's always this sort of notion, again, of infestation and taking advantage. This is a guy who, of course, has referred to African nations, Haiti and El Salvador, as shithole nations, talked about Nigerians saying that if they came to the country, they'd never want to return to their huts. We need less of these people from shithole countries and more people from Norway, right? I mean, this is, come on. How much more of that do you need to see and to hear before you realize that this is about sort of a fundamentally cruel, inhumane, and at its root, really racist white supremacist mentality? Even during the campaign, when he started his campaign and said, well, Mexico's not sending their finest. Look, as I've said before, no nation ever sends its finest. England certainly didn't. That's not who, those of us who descend from Anglos, they weren't the finest. The finest never get on the boat, right? The finest stay where the hell they are because they're winning. Why would they leave if they're winning? Winners typically don't leave. They stay because they're winning. And by the way, no nation ever sends anyone. It's not like immigration is this thing where, the government of whatever, actually like sponsors the boat and says, hey, y'all have a good time. Like there's nobody sending anyone. People are leaving. They are fleeing. And it's always the ones who were the quote unquote losers of their respective countries, who can't make it, who were suffering, who were starving, who were being oppressed, affected by gang violence in various parts of the world, or drug cartels, whatever it is. It's never the finest in the sense of the winners, right? The most successful, but it is people who have the drive and determination to try to start over again. There's something beautiful about that, but Donald Trump can't see that unless those people, I guess, are from Norway or at least have the skin complexion of people who are.